I'm standing in my old neighborhood again, and everything feels smaller than I remember. The maple trees that once seemed impossibly tall now bend their branches low enough that I could reach up and touch the leaves if I wanted to. The sidewalk cracks are still there, those same jagged lines I used to hop over on my way to school, but they've spread wider now, filled with weeds and the stubborn persistence of time. It's been 15 years since I walked down this street regularly, 15 years since Timothy Rivera walked beside me every morning and afternoon. Our backpacks heavy with textbooks and the weight of things we never said. I can still see him if I close my eyes, tall for a 14-year-old with that unruly dark hair that never quite stayed where his mother combed it, always falling across his forehead in a way that made me want to reach out and push it back. I never did, of course. There were so many things I never did. The house where I grew up sits at the end of the block, its blue shutters now faded to a gray-green that speaks of seasons weathered and time past. My parents still live there, though they've repainted the front door from red to black, a small change that somehow makes the whole place feel like a stranger's home. I'm visiting for the weekend, something I do twice a year now. Dutiful visits that leave all of us feeling like we're performing roles we've forgotten how to play naturally. But it's not the house that brought me back to this street corner where I'm standing now, watching the afternoon light slant through the branches the same way it did when I was 17 and afraid of everything I felt. It's the letter in my jacket pocket, the one that arrived at my apartment in Chicago 3 weeks ago, with Timothy's careful handwriting on the envelope and a return address I didn't recognize. If you're reading this from somewhere far from home, take a moment to let me know where you are in the comments below. And if this story is resonating with you, hit that hype button to help others find it too. Sometimes the stories we need most are the ones that find us when we're ready to remember what we thought we'd left behind. The letter was simple, just a few lines that managed to undo 15 years of careful distance. He was getting married, he wrote, to a woman named Helen Williams, someone he'd met at work who made him laugh and understood his terrible jokes. He wanted me to know, he said, because I'd been important to him once, because we'd been friends, because he thought I should hear it from him rather than through the inevitable small-town gossip that would eventually reach me. Friends. The word had stared up at me from the paper like an accusation, like a lie we'd both agreed to tell for so long that it had almost become true. Friends don't spend 4 years walking each other to and from school, finding excuses to stay late in empty classrooms, sitting close enough on park benches that their knees touch while they pretend to study. Friends don't look at each other the way Timothy looked at me during senior year, with something hungry and desperate and terrified flickering behind his eyes whenever he thought I wasn't watching. But I was always watching. That was the problem. I met Timothy on the first day of freshman year at Jefferson High, both of us lost in the maze of hallways that seemed designed to confuse rather than guide. I was clutching my schedule like a lifeline, trying to decode the room numbers that made no logical sense, when he appeared beside me with that easy smile that would become as familiar as my own reflection. "You look as confused as I feel," he said, and his voice had that quality that some people are born with, warm and genuine in a way that made you want to trust him immediately. "I'm supposed to be in room 237 for first period English, but I'm pretty sure I've been walking in circles for the past 10 minutes. I looked at my own schedule and felt something that might have been relief or might have been fate. "Same class," I said, and the smile that spread across his face was bright enough to make me forget that I had been dreading this day for weeks. We found the classroom together, and somehow that became the pattern. Timothy had a gift for making the complicated feel simple, for turning anxiety into adventure. When I couldn't figure out my locker combination, he sat with me in the hallway until we worked it out together. When I got lost trying to find the gymnasium, he walked me there, even though it meant he'd be late for his own class. "It's no big deal," he said when I tried to protest. "We're neighbors, right? Neighbors look out for each other." We weren't neighbors, not technically. He lived 6 blocks away, which in the geography of high school might as well have been different continents. But Timothy had a way of redrawing maps, of making distance irrelevant. By the end of that first week, he was walking me home every day, our route stretching longer and longer as we found new things to talk about, new reasons to delay the inevitable moment when we'd have to say goodbye. Those walks became the best part of my day, the thing I looked forward to from the moment I woke up until the final bell rang and I could meet him by his locker. We talked about everything and nothing, the kind of conversations that teenagers have when they're still figuring out who they are and who they want to become. Timothy wanted to be a writer, he told me, wanted to travel the world and collect stories from strangers. I wanted to disappear, to become invisible, to find some way to exist without taking up space or causing problems. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, he said when I admitted this to him one October afternoon as we sat on the swings at the elementary school playground, our long legs folding awkwardly around the chains designed for much smaller bodies. You're not a problem, Ryan. You're the opposite of a problem. I didn't know what the opposite of a problem was, but the way he said it made me want to believe him. Timothy had that effect on people, that ability to make you see yourself through kinder eyes. He collected friends easily, drew people to him with his laugh and his genuine interest in their stories. But somehow, despite all the people who wanted his attention, he chose to walk me home every day. Why me, I see? I asked him once during sophomore year, when his popularity had reached the kind of heights that should have made our friendship impossible. He could have walked home with Jeffrey Miller, the star of the basketball team, or Douglas Jimenez, who always had the best parties. Instead, he waited for me by my locker every afternoon, wishing and constant as sunrise. Because, he said, and then stopped, his cheeks coloring slightly in a way that made my stomach flip. Because you listen, really listen. And because when you smile, which you don't do nearly enough, it's like watching someone discover something amazing. I didn't smile then, couldn't manage it past the sudden tightness in my throat. But I wanted to. God, how I wanted to. Junior year was when everything started to change, though it took me months to understand what I was seeing. Timothy had always been tactile, the kind of person who communicated through touch as much as words. He'd grab my arm when he was excited about something, throw his arm around my shoulders when we walked, sit close enough on benches that I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. I told myself it didn't mean anything, that this was just how Timothy was with everyone. But I started paying attention, started watching how he interacted with his other friends, and I realized that the casual touches, the lingering eye contact, the way he found excuses to be near me, weren't universal. They were specific. They were mine. The realization should have made me happy, but instead it filled me with a terror so complete that I could barely breathe around it. I wasn't ready for what Timothy might be offering, wasn't ready to acknowledge what I'd been feeling for him since that first day when he'd smiled at me in the hallway. I was 17 and scared and living in a house where my father still used words like faggot as casual insults, where my mother changed the channel whenever anything remotely gay appeared on television. So I started pulling away, creating distance where there had been closeness. I made excuses for why I couldn't walk home with him, claimed I had to stay after school for tutoring or family obligations. I saw the confusion in his eyes, the hurt that he tried to hide behind his usual easy smile, but I couldn't explain without revealing everything I was trying so hard to deny. Did I do something wrong? He asked me one afternoon in March, cornering me by my locker when I tried to slip away before he could find me. His voice was quiet, uncertain in a way that I'd never heard before. If I said something or did something to upset you, I want to make it right. You didn't do anything, I said, which was both true and completely false. He'd done everything. He'd been kind and patient and beautiful, and he'd made me fall in love with him without either of us meaning for it to happen. I just need some space. The word hung between us like a physical thing, sharp and cutting. Timothy stepped back, and I could see him rebuilding his walls in real time, his expression shifting from open vulnerability to careful neutrality. Okay, he said, space. I can do that. But he couldn't, not really, because we still had classes together, still moved in the same circles. The difference was that now our interactions were polite and careful, stripped of all the warmth that had made them feel essential. He stopped walking me home, stopped saving seats for me at lunch, stopped looking at me like I was someone worth seeing. I told myself this was what I wanted, what I needed. I told myself I was protecting both of us from something that could only end in disaster. But lying in bed at night, I felt the absence of him like a physical ache, like I'd amputated part of myself and was only now realizing how much it had mattered. The worst part was watching him with other people, seeing him redirect all that warmth and attention toward friends who could accept it without complications. He started hanging out with Zachary Diaz more often, walking to classes with Jeffrey Miller, sitting with a group that didn't include me at lunch. And I sat alone telling myself that this was better, that this was safer, that this was the only way things could be. But Timothy was stubborn in ways that I hadn't fully appreciated. He might have given me the space I'd asked for, but he didn't give up entirely. He'd still catch my eye across crowded hallways, still offer small smiles that I was too cowardly to return. When I got sick with the flu and missed a week of school, I found a neat stack of notes from all my classes waiting in my locker when I returned, written in Timothy's careful handwriting with little jokes in the margins that made me laugh despite myself. "Zachary said you were out sick," he said when I tried to thank him, his tone casual but his eyes searching my face like he was looking for something specific. "I figured you'd want to stay caught up." "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than he could possibly know. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "I wanted to." Senior year arrived with all the weight of impending endings, and suddenly everything felt urgent in a way it never had before. College applications were due. Scholarships needed to be applied for. Decisions had to be made about futures that felt both impossibly distant and terrifyingly close. Timothy had been accepted to Northwestern, a full ride based on his writing portfolio and grades that made the rest of us look like slackers. I was headed to a state, school 3 hours away, a compromise between my parents' financial limitations and my desperate need to get far enough away to figure out who I was without the weight of everyone's expectations. We barely spoke anymore, but I was always aware of him, always conscious of where he was in any room we shared. It was like having a compass in my chest that only pointed in one direction, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. The last day of school should have felt like freedom, but instead it felt like mourning. I cleaned out my locker with the methodical precision of someone dismantling a life, throwing away 4 years of accumulated papers and projects and memories. I was almost finished when Timothy appeared beside me, leaning against the adjacent locker with an expression I couldn't read. "So this is it," he said, and his voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "Yeah," I said, not trusting myself to say more. "I'm leaving for Chicago next week. Northwestern has a summer program for incoming freshmen, and I figured I might as well get a head start." I nodded, focusing intently on the last few items in my locker so I wouldn't have to look at him. A part of me had been hoping we'd have the summer to figure things out, to find some way back of friendship, if nothing else. But Timothy was moving forward, leaving me in this place behind, and maybe that was for the best. "Ryan," he said, and something in his tone made me look up despite myself. His eyes were bright and determined, like he'd made some kind of decision. "I need to tell you something before I go." "You don't have to tell me anything," I said quickly, panic rising in my chest. I knew what he was going to say, could see it in the set of his shoulders and the way his hands were clenched at his sides. And I knew that if he said it, if he put words to the thing we'd been dancing around for 4 years, I wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. "Yes, I do," he said. "I've been trying to give you space, trying to respect whatever boundaries you need, but I can't leave without saying this. I love you, Ryan. I've been in love with you since sophomore year, maybe longer. And I know you feel something too. I can see it in the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. So I need to know, before I go, if there's any chance that you could love me back." The hallway around us had emptied out, most students already gone for the summer, but I could hear voices echoing from other parts of the building, the distant sound of doors slamming and cars starting in the parking lot. Normal sounds of a normal day, while my world tilted sideways and rearranged itself around Timothy's words. "I can't," I said, and the words felt like swallowing glass. "I'm sorry, but I can't." Timothy's face went very still, and I watched something die behind his eyes. "Can't or won't? Does it matter?" "It matters to me." I closed my locker with more force than necessary, the metallic clang, bowing down the empty hallway. I have to go. My mom's waiting. I started to walk away, but Timothy's voice stopped me. I'll wait, he said. And when I turned back, his expression was raw and hopeful and heartbreaking. However long it takes, I'll wait for you to be ready. Don't, I said, and I put every ounce of finality I could manage into that single word. Don't wait for me, Timothy. Find someone who can give you what you deserve. I left him standing there in the hallway, and I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had seen his face in that moment, I might not have been strong enough to keep walking. College was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to reinvent myself away from the suffocating familiarity of home. I threw myself into my studies with the kind of desperate intensity that professors mistake for passion, but is really just another form of running away. I majored in accounting, chose the most practical, least emotional field I could find, and built a life that was safe and predictable and completely devoid of the kind of complications that came with wanting things you couldn't have. I made friends, the kind of casual acquaintances that form around shared classes and study groups. I dated a few girls, relationships that lasted just long enough to convince myself and everyone else that I was normal, that I was figuring things out. But every kiss felt like lying, every intimate moment like I was betraying something essential about myself. I broke up with Elizabeth Rodriguez after 3 months, claiming I needed to focus on my studies. I ended things with Cheryl Nguyen before they really began, telling her I wasn't ready for anything serious. The truth was that I wasn't ready for anything at all. I was 20 years old and still running from the conversation I'd walked away from in that empty high school hallway, still carrying Timothy's words like stones in my chest. I heard about him sometimes through the inevitable small-town gossip network that connected our parents and former classmates. He was doing well at Northwestern, had joined the school newspaper, and was already getting his work published in literary magazines. He'd won some kind of writing contest sophomore year, a story about growing up in a small town that everyone said was beautiful and heartbreaking. I never read it, couldn't bring myself to seek out his words when I was working so hard to forget his voice. Junior year, I heard he was dating someone, a girl named Donna Morales from his creative writing program. The news hit me like a physical blow, even though it was exactly what I'd told him to do. I'd pushed him away, told him to find someone who could give him what he deserved, and apparently he'd listen. I should have been happy for him. Instead, I spent 3 days in my dorm room, claiming I had the flu while I tried to figure out why it felt like something inside me had broken beyond repair. That was when I started seriously considering transferring, maybe to a school on the West Coast where I could disappear completely. But my parents had already sacrificed so much for my education, and running away to California seemed like the kind of dramatic gesture that would require explanations I wasn't ready to give. So I stayed, and I graduated, and I got a job at a mid-sized firm in Chicago because it was far enough from home to feel like independence, but close enough that I could still visit twice a year and maintain the fiction that I was a good son who was just busy building a career. Chicago was supposed to be anonymous, a place where I could blend in and build a life that didn't require me to explain myself to anyone. And for a while it worked. I rented a small apartment in a neighborhood where I didn't know anyone, took a job where I could lose myself in spreadsheets and tax codes and the comforting predictability of numbers that always added up correctly. But the thing about running away is that you always end up taking yourself with you. The loneliness followed me to Chicago, settled into my bones like winter cold that never quite went away. I went through the motions of living, dating occasionally, making work friends who invited me to happy hours and weekend barbecues. But I always felt like I was watching my life from a distance, like I was an actor who had forgotten his lines. I was 28 when I saw Timothy again, completely by accident in a coffee shop in Lincoln Park on a Saturday morning in October. I was reading the paper and nursing my second cup of coffee when I heard that laugh, the one that had soundtracked my teenage years, and looked up to see him standing in line with his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. He looked older, more solid somehow, like he'd grown into himself in the years since high school. His hair was shorter now, more controlled, and he was wearing the kind of clothes that suggested success without trying too hard to prove it. But his smile was exactly the same, that warm, genuine expression that had made me fall in love with him when we were 14. The woman beside him was pretty in an understated way, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of comfortable confidence that suggested she belonged wherever she happened to be. She was laughing at something he'd said, looking up at him with obvious affection, and I felt that familiar stab of something that might have been jealousy or might have been regret. I should have left then, should have folded my paper and walked out before he had a chance to see me. Instead, I sat frozen in my chair, watching them order coffee and pastries with the easy intimacy of a couple who had moved past the awkward early stages and settled into something real. Timothy turned away from the counter while they waited for their order, scanning the crowded cafe with the casual curiosity of someone who was comfortable taking up space in the world. His eyes found mine across the room, and I watched his expression shift from mild interest to recognition to something more complicated that I couldn't quite name. He said something to the woman, who glanced in my direction with polite curiosity, then started walking toward my table with that same easy confidence he'd always carried. My heart was beating so hard, I was sure everyone in the cafe could hear it. "Ryan," he said when he reached my table, and my name and his voice sounded like coming home and leaving at the same time. "I can't believe it's you." "Hi, Timothy," I said, and was proud that my voice sounded relatively normal. "How are you?" "Good," he said. "Really good. I'm living here now, actually. Got a job at the Tribune about 6 months ago." "That's great," I said and meant it. Timothy had always wanted to be a writer, and the Tribune was exactly the kind of place where someone with his talent belonged. "Congratulations." "Thanks." He glanced back toward the counter where the woman was still waiting, then looked at me again. "That's Helen, by the way. My girlfriend. We've been together about a year now." Helen. The name from the letter, though this was years before that letter would arrive in my mailbox and turn my carefully constructed life upside down again. I wondered if she was the same Helen, if this was the woman he would eventually marry, if I was witnessing the beginning of something that would last. "She seems nice," I said, because it seemed like the kind of thing I should say. "She is," Timothy said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as me. "She's a teacher, works with kids who have learning disabilities. She's incredibly patient and kind, and she makes me laugh." "That's wonderful," I said, and tried to ignore the way he was looking at me, like he was searching for something specific in my expression. "What about you?" he asked. "Are you seeing anyone?" "Not at the moment," I said. "I've been focused on work, mostly." He nodded, and we fell into the kind of awkward silence that happens when two people have too much history and not enough present to fill the space between them. I could see Helen watching us from across the cafe, her expression curious but not worried. She trusted him, I realized. She had no reason to see me as a threat. "I should get back," Timothy said finally. "But it was really good to see you, Ryan. Really good." "You too," I said. He started to walk away, then turned back. "Maybe we could get coffee sometime. Catch up properly. I'd like to hear about what you've been doing all these years." "Maybe I said, knowing that I would never call him, that this chance encounter would have to be enough. He smiled, that same warm expression that had undone me so many times before, and rejoined Helen at the counter. I watched them leave together, her hand in his, and tried to convince myself that the hollow feeling in my chest was relief rather than loss. I didn't see Timothy again for 7 years, but I thought about that coffee shop encounter more often than I cared to admit. Sometimes I would find myself wondering what would have happened if I'd been braver, if I'd taken him up on his offer to catch up properly. But mostly I tried not to think about him at all, tried to focus on building the kind of life that looked successful from the outside, even if it felt empty from within. I got promoted twice, moved to a better apartment, started dating a woman named Cheryl Price, who worked in marketing and had the kind of aggressive ambition that I found both attractive and exhausting. We were together for almost 2 years, long enough that our friends started making jokes about when I was going to propose, long enough that I started seriously considering whether I could build a life around companionship and shared goals rather than the kind of desperate, consuming love that I'd felt for Timothy. But every time I thought about asking Cheryl to marry me, I would remember the way Timothy had looked at me across that crowded hallway when we were 18. the raw hope in his voice when he'd said he would wait for me to be ready. And I would realize that I was still not ready, might never be ready, and that it wasn't fair to ask someone to build a life with only half of me. I broke up with Cheryl on a Tuesday in March, sitting in her kitchen while she made coffee and talked about her plans for redecorating the bedroom. She took it better than I expected, which somehow made it worse. "I've been wondering when this would happen," she said, not looking up from the coffee maker. "You've been pulling away for months. I kept hoping you'd figure out whatever you needed to figure out, but I guess some things can't be forced." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Cheryl deserves someone who could love her completely, someone who didn't carry the ghost of another person around like a secret weight. "So am I," she said. "For what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake. Not about me, necessarily, but about whatever you're running from. At some point, Ryan, you're going to have to stop being afraid of your own life." Her words followed me home and settled into my apartment like unwelcome guests. I spent the next few weeks working late and avoiding the kind of social situations that would require me to explain why Cheryl wasn't around anymore. I told myself I was fine, that I was better off alone, that I didn't need the complications that came with trying to build something real with another person. But late at night, lying in bed and listening to the city sounds filtering through my windows, I would think about Timothy's letter and wonder what kind of man he'd become, whether he was happy with Helen Williams, whether he ever thought about that scared 17-year-old who had broken both their hearts in a high school hallway. The letter arrived on a Thursday in November, 15 years after I'd walked away from him and 11 years after that chance encounter in the coffee shop. My name was written on the envelope in handwriting that I recognized immediately, despite the years that had passed. My hands were shaking as I opened it, and I had to read it 3 times before the words really sank in. He was getting married to Helen Williams, the woman I'd seen him with all those years ago, the woman who had waited patiently while he talked to a stranger in a coffee shop. The wedding was in 2 months, a small ceremony with just family and close friends. He wanted me to know, he wrote, because I'd been important to him once, because we'd been friends, because he thought I should hear it from him. Friends. The word that had haunted me for 15 years. The lie we'd agreed to tell to make the truth bearable. But at the bottom of the letter in smaller handwriting that looked like it had been added as an afterthought, he'd written something that made my chest tight with possibility and terror in equal measure. "If you ever want to talk, really talk, I'm still here. I've always been here." I kept the letter on my kitchen table for 3 weeks, reading it every morning over coffee and every evening when I came home from work. I told myself I was going to throw it away, that the past should stay in the past, that Timothy was getting married and I had no right to complicate his life with my own unresolved feelings. But I couldn't stop thinking about that last line, the way he'd written, "I've always been here," like it was both a statement and a question, like he was still waiting, even after all these years, even with a wedding plan and a life built with someone else. I started drafting responses that I never sent, letters that tried to explain 15 years of silence and cowardice, and the kind of love that felt too big and dangerous to name. But every attempt felt inadequate, like I was trying to translate something that had no words in any language I knew. Finally, on a Saturday morning in early December, I got in my car and started driving toward the town where we'd grown up, where Timothy's parents still lived and where I assumed he'd be staying for the holidays. I didn't have a plan, didn't know what I was going to say if I found him. I just knew that I couldn't let him get married without trying to bridge the gap between who I'd been and who I was finally ready to become. The drive took 4 hours, and I spent most of it rehearsing conversations that would probably never happen. I imagined myself knocking on his parents' door, imagined the surprise on his face when he saw me, imagined finding the words that had been trapped in my throat for half my life. But when I got to town, I didn't go to his house. Instead, I drove to the old high school, parked in the empty lot, and sat there as the winter afternoon faded into evening. The building looked smaller than I remembered, like everything else in this place that had once seemed so important and permanent. I was about to start car and drive home when I saw him walking across the parking lot, hands shoved deep in his pockets against the cold. He looked older than he had in the coffee shop, more tired somehow, but still unmistakably himself. He was walking toward a car parked near the main entrance, but he stopped when he saw mine, peering through the windshield with the kind of cautious curiosity that suggested he wasn't sure what he was seeing. I got out of the car before I could lose my nerve, and we stood there looking at each other across 20 feet of cracked asphalt and 15 years of silence. "Ryan," he said, and my name sounded different in his voice now, weighted with surprise and something that might have been hope. "What are you doing here?" "I got your letter," I said, pulling it out of my jacket pocket like evidence of something. "I needed to see you." He walked closer, close enough that I could see the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we were teenagers, the way his hair had started to thin slightly at the temples. But his eyes were the same, dark and intelligent, and full of the kind of warmth that had always made me want to step closer and run away at the same time. "You came all the way here because I did the letter?" "I came because of what you wrote at the bottom," I said, "about still being here, about always being here." Timothy looked down at the letter in my hands, then back at my face. "I wasn't sure you'd even read it. You never responded to anything else I sent over the years." "You sent other things?" "Birthday cards, Christmas cards, a letter when your father died 5 years ago." He shrugged, trying to make it seem casual, but I could see the hurt in his expression. "I figured you didn't want to hear from me." I hadn't known about my father's death making it into any kind of public record that Timothy would have seen. Hadn't realized that he'd been keeping track of my life from a distance, the same way I'd been keeping track of his. The thought of him sending condolences that never reached me, of him thinking I'd ignored his attempts at connection, made something crack open in my chest. "I never got them," I said. "I moved apartments a few times, and I guess the forwarding orders expired." "Oh," he said, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "I thought maybe you just didn't want to be reminded of this place. Of me." "I never stopped thinking about you," I said, the words coming out in a rush before I could stop them. "Not once in 15 years. I tried to. God knows I tried, but I couldn't." Timothy was quiet for a long moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. The parking lot was empty except for us, the winter wind cutting through our jackets and making the bare trees creak overhead. It felt like we were the only two people left in the world, like this conversation was happening outside of time and consequence. "Why now?" he asked finally. "After all these years, why are you here now?" "Because you're getting married," I said. "Because I realize that if I don't say this now, I'll never get another chance. Because I've been a coward for 15 years, and I can't be a coward anymore." "Say what?" I took a breath that felt like jumping off a cliff. "That I love you, that I've loved you since we were teenagers, and I was too scared and too fucked up to do anything about it. That walking away from you in that hallway was the biggest mistake of my life, and I've been paying for it ever since." Timothy's face went very still, and I could see him processing my words, trying to figure out what they meant in the context of his life, now his engagement, his impending wedding. "Ryan," he said, and his voice was gentle but firm, "I'm getting married in 6 weeks. I know. To someone I love, someone who's been patient with me, who's built a life with me. I know. Then what do you want from me? What do you expect me to do with this?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself during the entire drive here. What did I want? What right did I have to show up now, after all these years of silence, and complicate his life with my belated honesty? "I don't expect anything," I said. "I just needed you to know. I needed to stop carrying this around like a secret, needed to stop wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to tell you the truth when it mattered." "When it mattered," Timothy repeated, and there was something sharp in his voice now. "You think it doesn't matter now? You're marrying someone else because you told me to find someone who could give me what I deserved, because you walked away and stayed away for 15 years. His composure was starting to crack, and I could see the anger underneath, the hurt that he'd been carrying all this time. "Do you have any idea what it was like, loving someone who couldn't even look at me, waiting for someone who made it clear that waiting was pointless?" "I was 18 and terrified," I said. "I was living in my parents' house with a father who used slurs at the dinner table and a mother who pretended people like us didn't exist. I didn't know how to be gay, didn't know how to love you the way you deserve to be loved. So you decided not to try." I decided to protect us both from something that felt impossible. That's bullshit, Ryan, and you know it. Timothy's voice was rising now, 15 years of frustration spilling out into the cold air between us. You decided to protect yourself. You were so afraid of being rejected by people who didn't matter that you rejected the one person who would have stood by you no matter what. He was right, and we both knew it. I had been selfish and scared and so focused on all the ways loving him could go wrong that I'd never considered the possibility that it could go right. You're right, I said. I was selfish. I was a coward. And I'm sorry. Timothy, Payne, I'm so fucking sorry for all of it. The anger seemed to go out of him all at once, leaving him looking tired and showing and older than his 33 years. I waited for you, he said quietly. For years I waited. Even when I was with other people, even when I was trying to move on, part of me was always waiting for you to come back and tell me that you were ready to try. I know. But I can't wait anymore, Ryan. I can't keep my life on hold for someone who might never be ready. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking for? I looked at him standing there in the gathering darkness, this man I'd loved for half my life, and tried to find words for something that felt too big for language. Forgiveness, maybe, I said, and the chance to stop running from who I am. I'm gay, Timothy. I've been gay since I was 14 years old and fell in love with my best friend, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Timothy was quiet for a long time, and I could see him working through something internal, some calculation that involved his fiancée and his upcoming wedding and the man standing in front of him who had just turned his world upside down. Helen knows about you, he said finally. What? She knows that I was in love with someone in high school, someone who couldn't love me back. She doesn't know it was you specifically, doesn't know you're a man, but she knows there's someone I never got over completely. The idea that I existed as a shadow in Timothy's relationship, a ghost that his fiancée had learned to live with, made me feel sick with guilt and something that might have been hope. She deserves better than that, I said. Yeah, she does. Timothy ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from when we were teenagers and he was working through a difficult problem. She deserves someone who can love her completely, without reservation. And I thought I could be that person. I tried to be that person. But you can't. No, he said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. I can't. I love her, Ryan, I really do. But I'm not in love with her, not the way she deserves to be loved. And I think she knows it, even if we've both been pretending otherwise. We stood there in the empty parking lot, two men in their 30s finally having the conversation they should have had when they were 18. The weight of all those lost years pressed down between us, heavy with regret and missed opportunities, and the kind of love that doesn't fade just because it's inconvenient. What are you going to do, I asked. I don't know, Timothy said. Call off the wedding, I suppose. Try to explain to Helen why I can't marry her without destroying what's left of her faith and love. Figure out how to tell my parents that their son is gay and has been lying to them for 15 years. I could help, I said, with the last part at least. I've gotten pretty good at coming out over the years, even if I've only done it to myself. Timothy almost smiled at that, the first hint of warmth I'd seen from him since this conversation started. You came out to yourself? About 1,000 times in therapy mostly. I've been seeing someone for the past few years trying to figure out why I couldn't seem to build a life that felt real. Turns out it's hard to be authentic when you're running from the most fundamental truth about who you are. And who are you, Ryan? It was the question I'd been avoiding for 15 years, the one that had sent me running from small-town expectations in high school hallways, and the boy who'd loved me enough to wait. I'm the man who fell in love with his best friend when he was 14, I said. I'm the man who was too scared to fight for what mattered most. I'm the man who spent 15 years building a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt empty from within. And I'm the man who drove 4 hours to tell you the truth, even though it's probably too late to matter. It's not too late, Timothy said, and something in his voice made me look up sharply. It's complicated as hell, and it's going to hurt people I care about, but it's not too late. What are you saying? I'm saying that I never stopped loving you either. I'm saying that every relationship I've ever had has been measured against the ghost of what we might have been. I'm saying that if you're finally ready to try, really try, then maybe we can figure out how to build something real together. The hope that bloomed in my chest was so sudden and overwhelming that I had to steady myself against my car. After all these years of carrying love like a burden, the possibility that it might be returned, that it might be enough to build a life on, felt too good to be true. Are you sure? I asked. Because I can't do this halfway, Timothy. If we try this, if we really try, I need to know that you're all in. I can't survive losing you again. I'm sure, he said, stepping closer until we were standing just a few feet apart. I've been sure since I was 16 years old and realized that walking you home was the best part of every day. I've been sure through every relationship that didn't work, every person I couldn't quite love enough. I've been sure even when I was planning a wedding to someone else. Then why were you going to marry her? Because I thought you were never coming back, he said simply. Because I thought this was as close to happy as I was going to get. Because I was tired of waiting for something that felt impossible. And now you're here. Now you're telling me that the impossible thing might actually be possible. Now I have to decide whether I'm brave enough to choose love over safety. I reached out then, slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to. But he didn't pull away. Instead, he stepped closer, close enough that I could touch his face, could feel the warmth of his skin under my palm. I choose love, I said. I choose you. I should have chosen you 15 years ago, but I'm choosing you now. Even though it's going to be messy, even though we're going to have to hurt people we care about, even though Timothy leaned into my touch, closing his eyes like he was savoring the contact after years of deprivation. I have to call Helen tonight, he said. I have to tell her the truth about who I am, about who you are to me. She's going to be devastated. I know. My parents are going to have questions, lots of them, and they're not all going to be easy to answer. I know. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to stop running and start building something real, even if it means dealing with all the messy, complicated parts of loving someone? I looked at him standing there in the gathering darkness, this man I'd loved for half my life, and felt something settle into place inside me, something that had been restless and searching for as long as I could remember. I'm ready, I said. I'm finally ready. Timothy kissed me then, soft and careful at first, like he was afraid I might disappear if he moved too quickly. But when I kissed him back, when I finally allowed myself to feel everything I'd been holding back for 15 years, the careful restraint gave way to something deeper, more desperate. We kissed like teenagers who had just discovered what kissing could be, like men who had spent too many years wondering what if. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, Timothy rested his forehead against mine and laughed, a sound that was equal parts joy and disbelief. I can't believe you're here, he said. I can't believe this is happening. Neither can I admitted. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all some elaborate dream. If it is, don't wake up yet. We stood there holding each other in the empty parking lot of our old high school, two men in their 30s finally claiming the love they should have had when they were boys. It wasn't the way I'd imagined it would happen, wasn't the neat, uncomplicated romance that existed in movies and books. It was messier than that, more complicated, weighted with the knowledge that our happiness would come at the cost of other people's pain. But it was real. After 15 years of running from myself, of building a life around the absence of the thing I wanted most, it was finally impossibly real. What happens now, I asked. Now I go home and have the hardest conversation of my life with the woman I was supposed to marry in 6 weeks, Timothy said. Now I figure out how to explain to my family why I'm calling off my wedding. Now I learn how to be the person I should have been all along. And after that? After that, we figure out how to be together. Really together, not just in stolen moments or secret conversations. We figure out how to build a life that doesn't require us to hide or apologize for who we are. I'd like that, I said. I'd like that very much. Timothy smiled, and it was the same warm, genuine expression that had made me fall in love with him when we were 14, but deeper now, weighted with the knowledge of everything we'd survived to get to this moment. I love you, Ryan, he said. I've loved you for half my life, and I'm going to keep loving you for whatever time we have left. I love you too, he said, and the words felt like coming home after a very long journey. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. You're saying it now, Timothy said. That's what matters. We kissed again, softer this time, a promise rather than a desperate claiming. When we separated, Timothy took my hand, threading our fingers together like we were teenagers walking home from school. Come with me, he said. When I talk to Helen, when I tell my parents, when I figure out how to rebuild my life around the truth, I don't want to do it alone anymore. Are you sure it's going to be hard enough without having to explain me too? You're not something I need to explain, Timothy said. You're the person I choose. You're sure you're the person I've always chosen, even when I was too scared or too stubborn to admit it. I squeezed his hand, feeling the solid reality of his palm against mine, the warmth of his skin and the steady rhythm of his pulse. After 15 years of carrying love like a secret, the simple act of holding hands felt revolutionary. Okay, I said, let's go home. We walked toward his car together, and I realized that this was what I'd been searching for all these years without knowing it. Not just love, but the courage to claim it. Not just happiness, but the willingness to fight for it. Not just the person who could complete me, but the strength to be complete myself. Timothy was right. It was going to be messy and complicated and probably painful in ways we couldn't anticipate. There would be difficult conversations and disappointed families, and the challenge of building something real out of years of missed opportunities and regret. But we would face it together, the people who had walked me home every day and the man who had waited when I ran away. And for the first time in 15 years, that felt like enough. It felt like everything. As we drove away from the school where our story began, I thought about all the versions of this moment I'd imagined over the years, all the ways I'd pictured our reunion happening. None of them had included a called-off wedding or the pain of hurting innocent people or the complicated reality of two men in their 30s trying to build a life together out of the wreckage of their separate attempts at normalcy. But this was better than anything I'd imagined, because it was real, because it was ours, because after 15 years of running from the truth, we were finally brave enough to run toward each other instead. The road ahead was uncertain, full of challenges we couldn't anticipate and conversations we weren't ready to have. But we were facing it together, and that made all the difference. Timothy reached over and took my hand as we drove through the darkness toward whatever came next, and I held on tight, finally ready to stop running and start living the life I'd been too afraid to claim. We were going home. Finally, after all these years, we were going home.